Hello and welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today we are going to be taking a look at the Oscar-nominated movie Emilia Perez, which is about a drug cartel kingpin who decides to become a woman. Though before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and let us know down in the comments below what your thoughts are and which movies you'd like to see us review next. And as always, thanks for tuning in, and let's dive in. Lee, the Oscars is going to be next month, so I think it's like March 1st, I think.
Yeah, it's like March 1st or March 2nd, yeah.
Yeah, it's on the Sunday. So we've pretty much spent the past few weeks just taking a look at movies that are contenders. So a few weeks ago we looked at Conclave, and today we're looking at Emilia Perez. And I don't know whether this is intentional or not, but we seem to be on some sort of LGBTQ streak going on right now, because
I guess yeah, I guess yeah, that's true.
Because the last movie we looked at had a intersex person, and this time we've got a trans person.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's true. Not intentional at all. I guess I don't know how to perceive that as far as the types of movies that are like out there now. But yes, that is a very fair statement to make. And it is kind of wild just to think about the premise of the movie. It just seems so far-fetched. But yeah, this is what we got. So we got Emilia Perez, and
so here's the thing. I mean, so over the past few weeks, Emilia Perez has been shrouded in a lot of controversy. So obviously, a lot of critics are coming out and saying this is just pure Oscar bait, and then to compound the matter, the star Karla Sofia Gascon was revealed to have tweeted out some pretty racial and Islamophobic tweets several years ago. So a lot of people have said this could torpedo Emilia Perez's chance of clinching the Best Picture award on Sunday. But I do want to get a few things out of the way, because this movie here has been described as Oscar bait. Lee, can you give us a quick definition of what Oscar bait is?
Yeah, sure. So at least for me, right? And I think, there's not like, you're not going to go to the dictionary and find a direct definition, but I would say it's a movie where you are clearly putting like elements for a variety of things into the movie that's supposed to get people talking about it. And I would say like definitely like LGBTQ is definitely one of those big things that's out there. So I think like kind of the subject matter of this absolutely kind of sticks out as far as that. I think the fact that it's a musical as well also probably plays a huge factor into it. Not say that every musical is Oscar bait, obviously, but I would say like we've seen that quite a bit with like something like Wicked, or don't have to look too far back to something like La La Land that did a lot of really that won a lot of awards. So I think that you're kind of getting a glimpse of that with this movie for sure, where I feel like it just kind of mashes together a bunch of elements that I guess people are wanting to vote for. Because we've started, I feel like, to move away from movies that are just good versus like, hey, this movie has a strong message, ergo, it's good. So I think that I don't know. Don't want to get too much into talk about the movie quite yet, but I would say was not a huge fan. I certainly can understand it getting like some, nods to like some of the songs and stuff like that, but to call it Best Picture, I feel like kind of does just movies in general a disservice.
I mean, what's really disturbing, because I watched this movie 4 times, and and each time I've watched it, I've understood less and less of what's going on here. What I find really, really strange is the fact that this movie is being nominated for an Oscar, where you don't really seem to know what's going on apart from the fact it's about a trans woman. And it leads me to wonder, is there some sort of checklist or criteria that the movie is following in order to get nominated? It's sort of like when you're applying for college. If you like tick these boxes here, then you're a shoo-in, right? That's the feeling I get. I mean, to your point, if you're if you're talking about representing someone from a marginalized community, if you're setting it in a non-Western or at least non-Anglophone country, and you have elements of a musical, but you're also including romantic elements, et cetera, then of course you're going to get in. And
Yes.
and to your point, it's pretty much a disservice because it's no longer making a movie just for the sake of art, right? It's more of doing it to gain something. And
Yes.
in the process, it becomes, a movie that's made in bad faith, as I'll elaborate further as we get near the end. But Lee, why don't you go ahead and take us into the movie that is Emilia Perez?
Yes. So let's go ahead and start off. So we kind of start off with, we got our character Rita, right? So Rita's played by Zoe Saldana, and she is this attorney that is, I think we're supposed to get the idea that she's a really good attorney, but she's kind of overshadowed by her boss, her co-counsel, and we see her, she's kind of like helping, almost like writing closing arguments for this really big high profile case with another, I think it was a cartel boss, I don't remember actually now, but she was a part of another high profile case. And it was kind of an interesting thing because we kind of get the first song right off the bat, right, where she's like kind of writing what she feels like is needed for this. And for me personally, right, I'm not huge on musicals, which I'm sure I've said at some stage on our show, but for me, I actually kind of enjoyed a little bit of the first song. I thought it was very kinetic. I like kind of everything that was happening. I enjoyed like a lot of like what they're trying to do with like this community to kind of put everything together. So it was kind of a pretty interesting way to start off the film, especially with the musical number at the beginning. So I was curious for you, Luca, were you kind of hit or miss on the beginning? Did it kind of strike you as anything, or did it just kind of fall flat for you?
I mean, to use your parlance, pick a lane and stick with it. Really, I think if you're going to make a movie like Emilia Perez, you've already jam packed a lot of elements into it. You don't really need to add the musical element in there.
Yes.
I will say this though, because I was reading about the reactions to the movie, and it's not surprisingly, it's not very popular among the LGBTQ community. And having watched it several times, I'm beginning to understand why, because it would seem to just stereotype the fact that that if you're going to make a gay movie, you have to have musicals in it, because for some reason gay people and trans people love musicals. And I feel like it detracts from the storytelling, really, because
of course.
because it's this idea that we don't know it's a gay movie unless we have musicals in it, right?
Yeah.
Also,
let's not forget the fact that this takes place in Mexico, and of course the story has to be about a drug cartel person, right? Because
it's sort of it would be like if a British filmmaker, because remember the filmmaker is French, so a part of me sort of wondering, is he sort of basing all of this on stereotypes of Mexico? It would be like a British filmmaker making a movie about America, but it's set in a trailer park and all the characters are
yes.
rednecks and meth dealers and stuff like that. But to go back to the point about the musical, the fact that you're having these musical numbers in there kind of detracts from the story, and it makes it rather campy, because if you're trying to make something that's serious, because from the very beginning, like it sets the tone that this is going to be a serious movie. Musicals, for the most part, they're known to add a bit of levity to the story.
Yes.
So when you have a musical called La Vaginoplasty, right off the bat, you're just sitting back and scratching your head and thinking, okay, what the hell is all this about here? So I feel so a part of me just feels like right off the bat you're being disingenuous in terms of telling a story about a trans person or a member of the community, and just resorting to type when you're saying, well, we got to do musical because that's what the gays love. And I did an interview a few days ago with a professor at Wake Forest who's very much not nowhere near the stereotype that you would think. So I feel like what they're doing here is just setting us up to say, well, this is what we think of the members of the community, so we're just going to give it to them without really investing in character-driven storylines or or creating a character that's very compelling. And I'll elaborate even further as we go
Oh,
deeper into
absolutely.
the
Yeah,
review.
because I think we got a lot to talk about with that. So, but yeah, so we have Rita's character, right? So, after our first song and dance number, right? We have Rita. She wins the case, albeit with her, impressive speech, kind of going to her co-counsel, or I believe she references it's her boss. Obviously she feels very much unappreciated for what she does, which I kind of get. And this is what kind of leads to, I guess, the story unfolding is she gets a mysterious call to meet her after this really big case with a high-profile drug cartel person. And I have to ask myself, like, if you're an attorney, right, you're typically, I think you think about like a lawyer or anything like that, typically think of someone that's rather educated, right? Like you have to go to school for all this stuff. You're thinking this is probably not someone that's gonna like kind of go out there and just meet people off of a phone call. I don't know about you, but I never met like random people that are like, "Hey, meet me out somewhere in 10 minutes." I don't know. I guess
Not to mention, you also have to have a bag over your head while you're on your way to the meeting.
Yes, that's very true. Yes. So, but she, shockingly to nobody, she's kidnapped. And this is where she meets the cartel boss, Manitas. And this is who we get to meet. This is the person that we want to do that is going to be transitioning from this male cartel leader to a female.
So let me ask you this. Sorry to interrupt, but I mean, the actress who plays Emilia Perez plays herself both pre and post transition. How did you feel about that?
That was actually pretty interesting, right? I would say like I could easily see both the roles being done by her, right? So I give them props for wanting to do that because I think it would feel weird not to have the character kind of like represent kind of their prior life or prior experience and then have a totally different person for the future.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that worked well for trying to help encompass that character going through that transition.
I give props to the makeup department because I think they did a phenomenal job in giving us like two distinctive persons.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and I think give some credit where credit's due for the actress that's playing that, and I think this is a really good time just to say something, right? So we're dealing with someone that's going through a transition. So I don't, I'm sure we're going to be referring to he, she, all this other type of naming conventions. So. Apologize in advance if we miss anything with that. It is absolutely unintentional with anything that happens. But when you're kind of going through this with this particular character, we see like her or him as he starts off and then the transition to the female. So there's just a lot of that. So I just wanted to preface that before we go further because I know that some things are going to get mixed up there.
Right. Can I just say for the record, for viewers watching, we are not transphobic. We are not bashing the trans community whatsoever. We are simply reviewing this movie based on its merits. That's all.
Yes. Without like trying to kind of impose any type of like out thing, because I think it's important that when we're looking at movies, you're looking at movies for the quality of what it does and not anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of its I guess purest form. So to say, not to get too pretentious sounding with that,
right?
But,
right. We're looking at the text itself.
So yes.
Yeah.
So this is Manitas. He's kind of like, hey, I want to transition. This is who I want to become. So he's hiring Rita to help kind of go through that process. So Rita is out there and she's trying to get like more information about the procedures. And the reason that I particularly talk about this, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, was we get our, I'm going to say it's a memorable song. And I had to look it up, right? Because I was curious about it.
Hello, very nice to meet you. I'd like to know about sex change operation. I see.
It's La Vaginoplastia, right? And this is where, to me, I couldn't take it serious. And I hate to say that because I think that there's a very serious message with this. But like for me, when I think of the musical numbers, right, I feel like the musical numbers need to they really need to help like drive the story, like help us understand more about the characters and should go through this. And I felt like this particular song just totally sucked me out of it because it's just like a musical number with people like pre and post op, and you're just throwing out like all these different medical terms, which I get, right? These are all things that people going through these types of surgeries are going through, but it just doesn't work for a song, right? It just, to your point, right? Songs are there to add levity. To take something like this and to make it a song, it just totally sucked me out of it.
Men to woman, or woman to men.
Man to woman.
From penis to vagina.
I mean, I'll go even further and say it sort of cheapens what a lot of people have to go through in real life when they're, because these are people who are struggling for years trying to figure out what their identity is, and I feel like to just take something like this and kind of reduce it to a jolly little number where where people are like showing off their nipples and their noses and all that stuff. I feel like, well, that's kind of a shitty move. Like you're just trivializing something that for some people is a way for them to sort of live their authentic self, really.
Yes. I totally agree with you, and I think like this is probably the song that most people know. Like I know there's some other musical numbers in there, but I think this one kind of stuck out just from the pushback it got, and I kind of I think there are people that obviously look at this as like kind of a negative because there is that stigma out there, but I felt like this was probably the one that immediately took me out just from a movie viewing perspective. Because we have Rita, she's out there trying to find this doctor, and to have kind of that musical number is really weird, but she does eventually find a doctor that's interested, and but the doctor, he's like, the only reason I would do this is if I could meet Manita, and this way I can kind of talk with him and make sure that this is truly what he's looking for. And this is where I feel like the movie, it's trying to do too much. You're trying to shove so much of this character into this movie, but as a movie, it falls flat. And here's why, right? Because we see like through like really quick voiceover, right? That Menditas, he's been kind of struggling with this body dysmorphia, right? For some time. Like he talks about it as a kid, and this is what he always wanted. But like we actually don't see him having the struggle. All we do is have the character tell us he's struggling with it. And to me, I just didn't appreciate that. Like if you're trying to create this movie, then show Benitez's character struggling with this, right? Show a flashback of him getting picked on or him like having that struggle, right? Don't just do some cheap voiceover to try to get your point across, because we're as an audience trying to get behind this character and understanding the emotions of what they're going through. And when you're doing it like this, you're not really giving the character the justice I think the character deserved. So I felt like that was a huge misfire, because I felt like this was the critical time to build that up for the character, and they just take like a minute or two to go through with it, and I just felt like it was so it was just so fake. So I don't know. What do you think about? I guess to me, a very integral part of the story that's just kind of done very hastily.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, if it's Oscar bait, right? If they're making this movie simply for the purpose of, of trying to get an award or just do some virtue signaling, I think the process is irrelevant, really, because you don't really develop any sympathy for the character because it's just so rushed. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, it also kind of just reduces this person to a mere artifice, because at that point you're no longer seeing them as a real person with struggles. You're just seeing them as someone who is basically there to act as a sort of representation for a marginalized community.
Yes.
And what I really dislike about it is the fact that out of all the people you could have taken, you had to take a drug lord,
Yes. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
make it that character. And I'm just thinking, this is just, I don't believe this at all, right? It makes absolutely no sense. Now, to be fair, I'm sure there are some people who work in drug trafficking who are struggling with gender dysmorphia or body dysmorphia, but I feel like if you're going to make a movie about a trans person, maybe choose someone who who's working in a more legit kind of business. Now there is a movie that came out a few years ago called Trans America, starring Felicity Huffman as a trans woman named Bree, and that movie I would recommend watching that movie because it tells a far better story about someone undergoing the transition process, because you can actually feel for the character and see what they're going through, right? You may not necessarily understand, but you can feel the pain that they're going through, because this is someone who's trying very hard to find acceptance in society. And with Manitas, before it becomes Emilia, I never get the sense this is someone who's struggling. I mean, this is a guy who's making millions, right?
Yeah.
He's very comfortable. He doesn't
Got
have
a wife
to.
and kids.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not even that. It's the fact that he's sitting on a pile of money, and he's just he basically gives Rita a blank check to go do all this research and find the best surgeons for him, right? So right off the bat, you kind of get the sense, even if you bought into the whole trans storyline, there's a sense of elitism in there, because at that point, it's like, this is someone who's at the very top and can afford to piss away money for all sorts of things and not have to worry about it. There's no struggle, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in Trans America, for instance, we're looking at a character who's having to work low-level jobs and save every penny that they get in order to afford to pay for a surgery to finally complete that journey. So I feel like just having a drug kingpin who makes millions off the misery of others, I feel like that also is a poor start right there.
Yes,
because
I agree.
Because most trans people are not going to be involved in the drug trafficking trade, and furthermore, they're not sitting on piles of money where they can just go and go off to Thailand or wherever and spend 3 weeks recovering from surgery. So the character in itself is rather disingenuous.
Yes.
Now if Manitas was like a low level, let's say if Manitas was a low level thug, right? Still not a good example, but if we go with the whole drug trafficking scenario, if he was a low level thug who was sort of like siphoning money off of from his boss to kind of save money from for the surgery, that would be far more compelling, right? It would add more elements to the story than just simply being someone at the very top who's just pissing money away because they want to fulfill a desire that we've only had 2 minutes to learn about.
Yeah, I would say for me personally, it's just don't have their occupation be a critical part of the story if that's what you want to focus on.
I mean, they did put a lot of emphasis on the fact that he's a drug lord, and they.
Oh yeah, and that's critical for the story, right? Because like you have like Rita, right? So while all this is going on, right? So Rita's like, okay, cool, I'm gonna help you do this, right? So we're gonna get your family, we're gonna get Manitas's family set up, right? So he has his wife Jessie, and he has 2 kids, right? So he's gonna get them set up somewhere, and then he fakes his death so he could undergo this operation. And this is totally unbeknownst to his wife and kids, right? Like they have no idea on the plan. As far as I'm aware, right? It's just Rita that is aware of what's going to be happening.
Now, can I just say you remember that one scene where Rita and Manitas are chatting, and then Manitas opens up his jacket and exposes. You can probably infer what he's showing off, right? So he's been on hormone therapy for 2 years.
Yes.
Are you telling me that at no point the wife didn't notice that?
Oh yes, I totally agree. That was something where I'm just like, wait a minute, like if you're gonna show us that, then how is nobody else picking up on it? Because it's very obvious that, I mean, like, we actually like see a scene where like the wife is like literally laying on top of him. I'm like, you have to kind of notice that. But yeah, it's
Well, also keep in mind if you're on estrogen for 2 years, there's going to be a huge difference. Like, you're going to start. You're going to start looking in a way that people are going to be like, well, is that a woman or a man? And I find that a little bit odd, that because Manitas, when you see him, he's very masculine. Like, he looks like Tekashi 69 almost, right? With the face tattoos and the grill and everything. But I mean, people who go on, hormone therapy, after 2 years, you start to notice a little, some features looking a little bit more feminine. So I kind of find that a little hard to believe that, he was able to, pass himself off as a man for 2 years. And also keep in mind too, I'm sure he and Jesse have been a bit intimate, at some point. I mean, are you telling me she's never like looked down and been like, bro, what the fuck? Like,
yeah. I mean, there is some stuff that like they kind of hint at, like they're being distant and stuff. But yes, I do agree. I think there is obviously like some signs that you would be seeing, and I think we kind of gloss over that. And I don't necessarily think it's a terrible thing, but like, I think this goes to, when you're focusing on this story, you have to pick what you need to focus on. And I think the movie just doesn't know what it wants to do. It just wants to have like everything be a part of this character. Mm-hmm. And instead of one thing excelling, to me, everything just falls flat. Because, he goes through this whole operation, and this is where he becomes Emilia Perez. And hopefully moving forward, we're just going to refer to her, him as a she, because now we kind of physically go through that transformation, or I guess like the movie at least gives us that, I guess, more clarity about that. And kind of an interesting thing, they just kind of do like a 4 years later, right? Which, I mean, I guess makes sense because, they don't focus like on the recovery and everything that's going on there. It's just kind of like, yeah, it happens. And then 4 years later, we have Rita meeting, or Emilia meets Rita, right? Rita obviously doesn't know who it is originally, but kind of like talks about it a little bit. And then that's when she picks up on like, oh, wait a minute, you are Manitas, and now you're Emilia. And we see Emilia wants to have her family brought back to Mexico. And I feel really bad that both of us came up with this same joke of the Mexican Mrs. Doubtfire. I feel terrible that that's what that came down to, but it is kind of hard to ignore that piece of the puzzle because it just it opened the door and we went in. I agree. It definitely set it up for that with its execution. But yes, I just want to call that out because you had texted me the night before, and I'm like, darn it, you said that joke. I had that joke in my script. We're both thinking about the same thing. And this is, to me, where it kind of moves away from the focus on the transition to more of the focus on the whole drug cartel aspect of it. And this is where I feel like the movie's trying to like go and touch too many things, and it's delineating the story. Because Emilia and Rita, right, they're kind of, as they meet together, they meet kind of like this random lady who just happens to have a missing child. And this prompts Emilia to help find this lady's like deceased son. And this is what kind of opens up this idea of like, oh, hey, I can make an organization where I can help like parents find their deceased kids that are part of like cartels. And talk about bringing things hollow, right? Like, this is why you can't have Emilia be a drug cartel person, because all I could think about all this time is like, okay, you were causing all this, right? Like you were killing people, I'm sure, in your role as a drug cartel person. Now you want to show like empathy or sympathy for people, and like for an audience member, I can never grasp at. Like, I could never like this character because, number one, you never showed us the type of character they are, and number two, you make them a drug cartel. So like my inclination is that this is, you know, a violent person that's always out there attacking people. There's infighting. So like you create this like very I would say like unsympathetic character, and you're trying to make us feel sympathetic, and it just doesn't work, because all I could think about the whole time is, you know what, some of these people that you're helping, you probably caused them, their loved ones, to be dead. And it just totally sucked me out of it. So I want you to talk about that, because I feel like that is a very big part of this movie.
I mean, throughout the entire movie, I get the sense that Emilia was very much a selfish person. I mean, well, because first of all, as Manitas, he doesn't really consider, you know, how his family would react or what they would have to go through if they found out that he was transitioning to a female, right?
Yes.
So that's why he goes to the whole, you know, song and dance of faking his own death and sending him off to Switzerland to, you know, live a life of luxury while he goes and, you know, disappears and becomes an entirely different person. And then start an organization looking for you know, I mean, let's be honest, victims of his own crimes, really.
Yeah.
Because when I'm watching those scenes, I'm thinking these are probably the victims of people that you know, whose deaths you ordered, right? Whether at your hands or at the hands of your insubordinates, and now you're trying to make good on it. And I couldn't help but think, you know, a lot of these people, you know, apart from wanting to know what happened to their loved ones, are also seeking justice. They want justice for the person who did all of this, right? So I'm sure a lot of them are aware. Yeah, it was Manitas del Montes who, you know, who ordered the hits and killed these people, and now he died in an accident. And I guess we can get some sort of closure right there. But at the same time, I'm wondering, like, how shitty must you be to be the person, you know, who's going and trying to, you know, do good on this when you were the ones who perpetrated the crime in the first place?
Yes.
It's really two-faced when you think about it. Because and I'll say this, I mean, I mean, it kind of portrays, you know, people of the LGBTQ community in a bad light, and I read this on Wikipedia and other sites where a lot of people have said, you know, this movie does nothing but just portray us as, you know, liars. And at first I was a little bit confused, but as I was watching those scenes over and over again, I'm thinking they're absolutely right. Like, there's no saving grace to Emilia Perez, because even if she is doing something that would seem ostensibly good, you kind of have to wonder what her motivations are, really.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
And I would go so far as to say she can come off and say, yeah, I mean, it was Manitas who did it, but I'm not Manitas. I'm Emilia. So technically, I can't be held responsible for that. And it's like, no. I mean, you and Manitas are one and the same. Like, you should be held, you know, just as much responsible for these crimes as Manitas, you know, regardless of what you say or do.
I agree. I think they try to get involved, and I get what they're going for, right? They're wanting to show that rebirth, right? So Manitas' training has changed into Emilia Perez. This is her opportunity to start over a fresh life. But to, I think, both of our points, right? You can't just do that, right? Like, this is not like one of those things where it's like, oh, like I have this symbolic reawakening. It doesn't work when you have that much red in your background.
No, but I'll say this. Like, I will applaud Emilia for trying to make good on that, but I feel like,
sure,
but I feel like at the same time it's like, I mean,
too little, too late.
Yeah, exactly. And you also have to wonder too, like, and I'll probably keep beating this over and over again. What's really her motivation? Because you see later on, she meets another lady, and then she ends up shacking with her, and they end up having a little bit of an affair. So then you're like, okay, so now you're using this to kind of, you know, get some action, like,
oh yes,
what's going on here?
You know, let's just segue into that, right? Because that to me was so messed up, right? Because she meets up with this female, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, thank you. Well, I forgot the name, I didn't write it down. So but meets up with her, right? And this lady, she goes there to meet Emilia to figure out like something about her deceased husband, who, like I said, was obviously a piece of shit, right? Like she talked about like, attacked her and, did all this terrible things. Guy's obviously, probably deserves to be dead if we're being realistic with everything.
Yeah.
But, we're watching that, right? And we see Emilia be like, yeah, the guy's dead, and they kind of like bond over this. And it's like, as she's leaving, right, as she just met this person, she's just like, oh hey, we should like meet up and stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's disgusting. Like that's so wrong to me. Like there's like no moral compass there. Like that's like literally going to the morgue, having some guy that's there be like, yep, that's the dead person, be like, hey, what you doing later? Like that's just
if we can dig back to our Catholic school days, it's sort of like the whole story with David and Bathsheba, right? David falls in love with Bathsheba, but she's already married. So what does he do? He sends her husband up to the front lines and purposely has him killed, so then he can sort of shack up with her. It sort of reminded me of that in a way, because
it was a very poor choice, right? Because I think, once again, this goes to us wanting to show that we want to like this character, right? Like, if you're going to go through all this, you have to actually, like, depict a character that we want to get behind. So, yes, like, helping, having a character, like, help loved ones get, just kind of that closure about what happened to their loved ones. Hey, that's good. Even though we're just going to ignore the fact that, the person that's helping do all that had a hand probably in a good chunk of those. But on top of that, now you're going to have this, like, you're going to have, like, Emilia just kind of, like, really kind of almost like, it's like this person is such a vulnerable state, like they're in an emotional crisis, and you're taking advantage of them. Like, that is just, like, I just could not get over how, like, disgusted. I felt dirty watching that.
But that's what I'm saying, because throughout the entire movie,
I agree. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Like, Emilia is a very selfish person at her core, because because you would think someone who is trying to create a new slate. I mean, if they want to transition to a female, that's fine. If they want to make up for the crimes of their past, that's fine also. But I mean, but the way that she goes about doing it is just so. It's just so awful. It's like there's nothing about her that you would feel is is commendable. And as we go further and further into the movie, you sort of begin to ask yourself, are we supposed to root for Emilia? Because what we've seen so far, hasn't really played out too well.
Agreed. So yeah, and I'm gonna take a slight detour here, right? Because we're near the third act, and I do want to talk about this one song, right? The song called El Mal, right? This is the song that won the Golden Globe for best score, best original song.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to get like kind of your feedback on that. Right now, I didn't go through and watch all the other like original song nominees. I just, watched El Mal. So this is the sequence, just to be sure we're on the same page, because I had to go out of my way to obviously look up the song and verify. This is the song where Zoe Saldana is in like the red suit, and they're at the like donor ball or whatever that they're there for. So I wanted to get your feedback, right? What did you think about that song? Knowing that this is the song that ended up winning the Golden Globe for best original song.
I mean, the only thing I can say is, if this is what the Golden Globes and the Oscars thinks is great, then we've really, sunk in terms of movie quality at this point.
No, I'm not gonna lie. I thought it was okay. I kind of got into it, but to think about that being the best original song just didn't really work for me. Like, I think that Zoe Saldana did like kind of a good job with, I guess, call it like rap rock or something. So I thought it was okay. Now, I do remember like seeing, and I forget what the name of the song was, but it's from The Challengers, which I think was a better song overall. I felt like that one was more deserving. I don't remember the title of it. But I wasn't as bothered by it, but I was kind of shocked to see that was deemed kind of the best original song. But I don't think I maybe disliked it as much as maybe you disliked it.
Well, I'm not a fan of musicals in general, so I mean,
Yes,
that's not really
that's
saying
true.
much.
So, so all right, so let's go ahead. So we're gonna jump into kind of the final act here. So this is a good time to kind of reintroduce Jessie, right? So Jessie is Emilia's wife when she was, Manitas, and we kind of find out that she was unfaithful during this time frame when they were together, and so she's like returned to Mexico with the kids, and she's kind of going out and seeing this guy, and this leads to this like kind of altercation with Emilia because Jessie ends up she's going to get married to Gustavo, who she had a fling with back when Manitas was still around and everything. And they get into altercation over the kids, and Emilia like literally like attacks her, right? And not sitting here, I'm not gonna get into all the domestic violence type of stuff. Like there's already enough challenging subjects in this, but I mean, once again, I know that the movie wants us to kind of like give away hints, at least to Jessie, that who this is. Jessie doesn't pick up on it at all because I don't think she doesn't figure it out until the very end. But just once again, goes back to we're trying to create this good character, and well, yeah, we could understand that Emilia is going to have that struggle with dealing with the situation. Like I think Emilia as a character has to understand that for Jessie's mindset and for the kids' mindset, their father is dead, right? So, I think you've mentioned a few times, and I agree with you, that ultimately the character feels like she's very selfish for wanting to constantly try to integrate them back into her life, even though she's not very open about everything that's going on. And this causes Jessie to kind of flee with the kids. And Emilia, right, she in retaliation has Gustavo, right, the fiance, he gets beaten up, right, and he's pretty much like threatened, like, you have to leave town, and you need to get out of here. And then Emilia freezes the bank accounts for Jessie, being like, hey, you're not gonna get away from me or anything like that. So in a total escalation, Jessie and Gustavo end up kidnapping Emilia for a ransom. And I don't even really know where to start with all this, because it's just like you're not showing us wanting to like this character, right? Like you tried a little bit to show that this character is like trying to turn over a new leaf, but like as we go throughout, like we just see more and more of why we shouldn't like this character. Now, I'm not here to talk about Jessie's fiance Gustavo. Like, I know there's obviously some probably skeletons in the closet there, but it just once again kind of created this character that I feel like we as an audience want to root for. And they just once again they're almost like going back down the dark path that they went through before. And I wasn't a fan of it. Is there anything else you want to add to that? I know I don't want to beat a dead horse with this, but it just feels like it's just another example of why we can't really get behind this character.
I mean, the fact that you have this altercation between Jessie and Emilia, I feel like that's a tell right there. Like. Mm-hmm. That really pulls you out of the story, because whatever story they're trying to create, as soon as that happens, it's like, okay, yeah, I can't watch this. This person's a piece of shit.
Yeah, I agree. There's just too many problems that are going on for it. And while it maybe is a more realistic interpretation of like what would happen, and just like having someone be upset, like, hey, my kids are being taken away from me, I can't really be upfront with it. Like, I could understand kind of the internal struggle someone would be going through.
But it's the lack of honesty on Emilia's part, because because at every turn she had an opportunity to sort of come clean and maybe not go down the path that we're seeing on film. But whatever reason, she just feels it's better to just be silent about it, and this is what happens. She ends up losing a few fingers as a result.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great segue to our kind of like ultimate conclusion here. Is like, yes, she's getting ransomed. So Rita receives a package with a few of Emilia's fingers. So Rita ends up being like, hey, I'm gonna get a group of people together, and we're gonna go get Emilia back. This kind of leads to our climax where these people from Gustavo and Jesse's side are attacking like Rita and some of the people that are working with Emilia, and there's this kind of big firefight. Gustavo ends up escaping with Rita, and they put Emilia in the trunk. And like before this happens, Emilia is kind of like sitting there, and she's kind of talking to Jesse about like everything that they kind of did, right? Trying to show or prove that Emilia is indeed Manitas, the husband that she thought is dead. And you kind of go through all this, and Jesse's reaction, which I mean, I don't know how I would react to a situation like that, but it seems to be kind of a silly reaction because you have Jesse and Gustavo up in the front of this car with Emilia in the trunk, and Jesse's like, hey, as we're speeding away in this car, this is a perfect time to have a giant altercation where I'm going to pull a gun out on Gustavo. And I just was like, my eyes, like, they just rolled right into the back of my head. Because this is like every stupid cliche thing where, like, whenever there's like a big car chase or something's happening, the most logical thing is just to stop the stupid fucking car, right?
Mhm.
But like everyone's always like, no, I'm just going to keep flooring it. So while I'm fighting with someone, I'm going to keep flooring it as I'm like dangerously close to this cliff. And it ends up like, they end up just like driving off the side. The car explodes and all three of them dead. And I'm just like, oh, okay, that was stupid, right?
It was very much over the top because it wasn't enough for the car to crash into a gully and that's it. It had to explode into flames, and yeah, that's when they're dead. Like like throughout this entire movie, I kept thinking they're really dialing it up to 11. Like they're just it's campy and they're overdoing it on everything. It's not enough to have a story about someone who's transitioning to a female. We have to make it a musical. It's not enough for this person to be someone who's supposedly trying to turn a new leaf. She still has all these bodyguards and henchmen at her disposal, right? And it's not enough for them to be dead from a simple crash. The car has to explode and everybody gets barbecued on the inside. Like they just keep making it weirder and weirder and making it more exaggerated than it needs to be.
Agree. I totally agree. Like there was a much more subtle way we could have done something like this that would have, to me, had a lot more impact, right? Because I think ultimately, right, the movie ends with like Rita kind of telling the kids about the truth of the situation. And we see kind of like Emilia, there's like some type of, funeral procession that's happening, because it's a musical, is this actual people that are there or are these people that are just part of the musical? I don't know, but it's just a very bizarre ending, and it made me kind of realize like this movie had an opportunity to do something good, but instead I felt like it just fell into it tried to check too many boxes instead of just focusing on elements that could have made this good.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I feel like there must have been some sort of secret checklist that the director knew about, and that's why they included all these elements in order to, get a shoe in for the nominations.
Yeah, like why not just like it could have been just a story of a person transitioning, right? And they could have maybe had maybe like a terrible skeleton in their closet that they had to overcome, right? Like maybe they accidentally killed someone in rage, right? Like they were just like this person was making fun of them because of the way they looked, and they just kind of got to the moment. There was just this altercation. Maybe like it wasn't really their fault, but kind of was, and they have to kind of overcome this. Like that would have been an interesting thing to see a person go through that individual story of how to overcome something. But instead, you have someone that transitions that also is a drug cartel boss, that like has this like nonprofit organization that's finding their deceased loved ones, that also has like, you know, this whole love story that he's trying to deal with, that has this, you know, kind of ridiculous shootout at the end to kind of capture the story. I'm like, it's just, you're trying to do too much. And I think that's the problem I have with it, because I think for the most part, like, we see some really good moments with the characters, right? You know, I think Zoe Saldana does a good job in this movie. She definitely feels like she gets way too much screen time at the beginning, which I feel like absolutely should have been going to understanding Manitas' character before the transition. And I think that the actress that played Emilia, she had some good touching moments during that sequence. Like, just like, I think back to kind of when she's in the bed with her daughter, and the daughter's like, you know, you smell like my daddy. And you just kind of see like the emotions kind of waft over her face. Like, I get that, right? I can understand that, but there's just too much of the other stuff that doesn't work. And there was moments that stuck out to me as positive, but overall it was just a mesh. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to wrap up here with a score, because, you know, to have this be nominated and win, right? And I think it won in the Golden Globes, at least, not the Oscars, but the Golden Globes. I think it won Best Picture for like a drama and comedy, or I don't forget what's the category. Maybe it's comedy and musical. What's the category? Do you know?
I mean, yeah, it's probably comedy musical.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, you know, I can't say I've watched them all, right? But like, to me, I feel like the bar was not very high with this. It felt like a movie that it wanted to do so much, but in order to do so much, it just failed on to meet each of the storylines. Nothing kind of gave the closure I think it needed to have, because you wanted to focus on all this stuff. And the music, for the most part, I just didn't really care for. It just, there's so many times there's just random characters singing, some of them with very little, if any, musical talent. There are some songs that kind of stuck out. But I mean, overall, like, when I think of a musical, I really want a lot of those musical numbers to really hit. And I think for the most part, outside of like maybe one or two, like, I was just like, it's pretty forgettable as far as that goes. So I would say, if I'm going to give this a grade, right, I'm going to give this like a 1.8 out of 5. I think there's some good bits in this. I think there is some, like, definitely like technical things. There's some really strong cinematography. Like, some of the transitions they do are very interesting. So like, it had like a lot of the stuff that's out there, but I feel like I'm very connected with the story of this movie, as far as like, that's what I like to see in my movies, is a strong story. And I just never really could get behind the story of this characters or what they're wanting us to get out of this movie.
All right, so you were giving it a 1.8 out of 5?
Yes.
All right, I'm giving it a 1.5 out of 5. I said this at the very beginning. This was a movie that was made in bad faith. I mean, this was a movie simply made for the sake of winning an award. It didn't care who it had to step on in order to achieve its goal. It just wanted the award. Now, remember when we did our review of American Fiction last year?
Yes.
And we were talking about how the protagonist basically had to give into stereotypes in order to be successful, right?
Yes.
Because before, he was just a university professor who could barely make a name for himself as a writer. What I really, really liked about that movie was the fact that it took you know, the general stereotypes of the Black community and sort of took the piss out of it. So
Yes.
so throughout the entire movie, we knew that everybody was in on the joke. I mean, they're basically saying, okay, this is what you think of us. All right, we'll go ahead and go along with it, but we're not going to play it the way you're expecting it to be played. And as a result, they took these stereotypes and they had fun with it, and it was a good movie as a result.
Fantastic movie.
Now, with Emilia Perez, you're doing the same thing. You're taking these stereotypes of Mexicans and trans people and putting it on film. The problem is that they're playing it straight, you know, pardon the pun. And as a result, it suffers as a movie because it's not. It's trying so hard to be serious. It's comical at the end. Um, no, I will say this. I think I really think Zoe Saldana is the only person who actually plays it straight, who's actually taking it seriously. Because everybody else, you kind of have to wonder what the hell's going on with their character. Because like I said earlier, Emilia is very much a selfish person who's really in it for herself. Jessie as a person, I feel like she's equally selfish, but you could sort of understand why to a degree, just because she's in a marriage with someone who, isn't all there as a result. Now, had they made the movie and done it in a way where they sort of lean into the stereotypes and just let us know, hey, we're not going to take this seriously either. We know this is what you think of Mexicans and gay people or trans people, but we're gonna have a little bit of fun with it. I think it would have been a little bit more palatable as a film. Now, another thing I will say too is that as a movie that's trying to represent, and I'm gonna be generous here. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that they were trying to make a movie that was representing trans people, right? You could have done a far better job in making us, sympathize with the character.
Absolutely.
Now, I did mention Trans America earlier. I think that's a great movie, and I think it does a far better job in representing the struggles of a trans person when they're undergoing transition. Because you mentioned earlier how if we had seen some sort of sordid past, a skeleton in the closet that they're trying to ameliorate, I think that would have been far more interesting. What we see in Trans America is Bree, the protagonist, who is on her way to get the final surgery to fulfill her goal of becoming a woman, when she finds out that she has a long lost son from an affair from way back when. And at first she's very hesitant. She doesn't want to confront that past, but throughout the entire movie, she comes to realize she has to accept this long lost son and make peace with who she was as a person in order to move forward, right? And as a result, that movie is far more compelling as a result, because you can see where she's coming from and where she's going. Here with Emilia Perez, you don't really want to know what the skeletons in the closet are, because they're very unpleasant, right? And we see it when she starts an organization, and you kind of get the feeling, I think this is probably something we don't really need to know that much about, because I think you and I can both agree that's the kind of stuff we really can't get behind, honestly. So the fact that you have a character like this who is a drug lord and who's let's be honest, who's basically spending most of her time going around killing people to eliminate the competition, it really doesn't, right off the bat, it doesn't make them that great of a character. And then to go behind someone's back and orchestrate these elaborate schemes in order to live their quote unquote authentic life, I think it just comes off as a really, really bad move. And then later on to become very overzealous to the point of attacking the mother of your children to keep them, in the house. I think that just proves that this person isn't someone we can get behind. If we're supposed to sympathize with them because they're trans, good luck in trying to sell that, because it's not working whatsoever.
No.
And I think what they should have done really was, and I mentioned this already, if they had made Manitas someone who's like a lower level thug in the organization, who's sort of skimming money in order to save it for that operation, right? I think that would be a bit far more compelling, because it'd be a bit more realistic.
Yes, we need more relatable stakes, right?
Right, because they're facing a risk from so many different sides. They're facing a risk of being alienated from their family, but they're also having to deal with the risk of possibly losing their life because they're doing something like that, embezzling money in order to try to, become the person who they feel they should be. I think that would be a far more interesting movie to watch than simply someone who has all this money and has decided, all right, I think today I'll just become a woman, because why not? Another issue that I have is the fact that we're talking about a French director who's decided, I'm going to make a movie that's set in Mexico and it's going to be focusing on drug cartels, right? I kind of feel like it's a really, really bad move, and
Yeah.
and a lot of Mexicans have even said, this movie portrays us in a very bad light, and I can understand why.
Yeah,
And-
totally. Yeah.
And I would even say, I would even say, if I was Mexican, I would say, listen, I can understand it if the Americans made a movie like this, because we're used to getting shit from the Americans, but you, a Frenchman, a European, you're supposed to be much better than that. Like, I thought Europeans are supposed to see things a lot more clearly, but no, apparently you're just as bad as they are. Apparently you see us as narcos who wear cowboy hats and sombreros and drink tequila and basically attack everybody for no apparent reason. So I think it's such a terrible move to just lean on these stereotypes rather than try to tell an authentic story. I don't think it is going to get the award for Best Picture or whatever, but who's to say? I mean, maybe people will overlook Karla Sofia Gascon's tweets and just go with it because it's a musical about a trans person. But I feel like there are just so many different elements that worked against it. That I mean, really, it's the proverbial stepping into the rake right there. Like, you didn't have to do what you did, but you did it anyway, and you shot yourself in the foot as a result.
Mm-hmm.
And one other thing too, I feel like it's getting pretty old, trying to lean in all these stereotypes, because as I mentioned earlier, American fiction takes the stereotype and just has fun with it. It rolls with it, but it also knows that not all Black people are like that, right? I wish what they could have done was kind of show a different side of Mexican society rather than just lean on the fact that apparently the whole country is occupied by narcos and drug cartels. But I guess for whatever reason they're playing to the gallery and they're just saying, hey, we know it's if we included other elements to make Mexicans look civilized, you wouldn't know it was Mexico. So we have to lean in on this, so you'll know it's set in Mexico. So I just feel like overall this movie, it was just made in bad faith. I'm sorry to keep saying that, but that's what I keep thinking over and over again as I watch this movie, because it even if it was trying to represent the trans community in a different light, I think it failed tremendously. I'm not surprised that Mexicans are pissed off about this because it puts them in a negative light, and I think it just kind of puts filmmaking in general in a bad light, because it's no longer about telling a really, really good and compelling story. It's just simply making a movie for the sake of winning an award.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope this doesn't set a precedent for future filmmaking, but you never know, really.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts you want to add?
No, I think you wrapped up really well. I just, it feels weird, like, to see this get all the nominations, and just like, I think both of us agree after watching it, it just doesn't feel like it's warranted. I think there's always this like kind of gap with, kind of the critics versus the audience, right? Like, us just lay people that are watching something, and then the critics are sitting there saying something totally different. I think like on Rotten Tomatoes, like, this didn't get a huge overwhelming. I think it was something like 70%. So it's like, it just seems like there's so many of these like things that are just not working for it. So to see it kind of get pushed out there into the limelight like it is, it just, I feel like it's out there for the wrong reasons.
That's not sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I kind of wonder if there's like certain agents within who are actively promoting and pushing this movie to be.
Oh yeah, I mean, Netflix was even talking about that, right?
Yeah.
Like they were like, yeah, we're really pushing this for award season, and then like, the past tweets from I forget. Help me out with the name.
Karla Sofia Gascon.
Karla Sofia Gascon. Thank you. Came out and they're like, oh, well, now we're gonna stop doing all that. And I'm just like, I don't want to sound like an old person, punching at clouds, but it's just like, can a movie just stand on its legs for just being a good film and not having all this like baggage with everything? Just like help us see good movies again. That's what I want to get out of it, and that's all I'm gonna say about it. I don't want to dwell on this much longer. So,
I mean, what's ironic is that at the same time last year we reviewed 2 great movies, so we know that there are good movies out there.
Absolutely.
We looked at the holdovers in American fiction, so we know people can make good movies. I think it's just a matter of choice, and that's what I find so distressing is the fact that we know. Studios are capable of making good movies. The question is, are you willing to do that? And I think the answer here is no. But that's my conclusion. But that's going to wrap up our review of Emilia Perez. Let us know down in the comments below what you think. Did you enjoy Emilia Perez, or did you find it as interesting as we did? And as always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next one.